He wore my father's watch on their date. I gave it to him as a heirloom but saw it in a rooftop selfie with my cousin. He told her I was just a roommate with history and claimed he was stuck until the mortgage cleared. Then he sold my dad's collectibles, put the deed in her name, and left me with hidden taxes. He said, "That's what you get for trusting," my family said, "let it go." But then I found his storage unit filled with everything he swore he never took. I wasn't even snooping. That's the worst part. My cousin Clara posted one of those sickly sweet Instagram stories, you know the kind, a rooftop dinner in Nashville, string lights, wine glass reflection, and her caption said, "He makes me feel seen." It was the watch that did it. My father's watch. The old Omega Seamaster I gave to Ethan last Christmas after my dad passed. I'd spent weeks deciding to let it go. It was supposed to symbolize trust, the kind that doesn't have to be said out loud. And there it was, gleaming on Ethan's wrist while his hand rested on her thigh. At first, I thought maybe it was an old picture. Maybe Ethan lent it to her for something dumb, like a couple aesthetic. But when I zoomed in, I saw the date tag in the corner. That photo had been taken 2 nights ago, when Ethan told me he was working late to catch up on client invoices. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like my ribs caved in. I sat there, phone shaking in my hand, scrolling through Clara's story like I was watching my own life collapse in real time. And when I saw that his other hand, the one holding a glass of wine, had my father's ring on it, the one he swore he kept safe, I actually gagged. It took me less than an hour to find out everything. I went through Ethan's Venmo and PayPal. We shared the same desktop for bills, and there were transactions to a collectibles site. My dad's record player, his pocket knife, the signed baseballs from when he coached Little League. Sold. When I tried to log into the property tax portal, something Ethan handled, every year I noticed something was off. My name was missing. The house deed, which my dad and I had paid off together, had been transferred. The new co-owner, Clara Simmons, my cousin, I called him immediately. He didn't even sound surprised, just sighed like I was being dramatic. "Yeah, I made some changes," he said. "Clara's better with paperwork. You're too trusting, it's your weakness." I could barely breathe. "You sold my dad's things. You transferred the house. He cut me off. You'll figure it out, you always do. Consider it a life lesson, don't give people heirlooms unless you're ready to lose them." Then he hung up. I remember standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by empty boxes, the ones that used to hold my father's things, and just thinking, I can't even cry. He took that from me too. When my relatives found out, they told me not to start family drama. Clara's mom even texted me, "Sweetheart, it's just stuff, let it go for peace." But I couldn't. Not when I realized I was now the only one listed for property taxes. He transferred everything else to her, but left the tax liability in my name. It was like he wanted me to drown slowly, legally, financially, emotionally. Then, 2 weeks later, I got an email from a storage facility near Franklin. It was a past due notice, addressed to Ethan but sent to our old shared email. I don't know why, but something told me to go. So I drove there on a gray Wednesday, signed in under his name. They didn't even ask for ID, and they opened the unit. What I saw inside made my knees buckle. Because right there, stacked in rows of labeled boxes, was everything I thought he sold and something else. Something far worse. Ethan and I met in 2016, back when I thought love was supposed to feel like rescue. My dad had just died of a heart attack, and I was drowning in grief and paperwork. Ethan was the first person who didn't flinch when I talked about it. He'd sit with me in silence while I went through my father's things, organizing, labeling, crying. He didn't rush me, at least not at first. He was gentle in all the ways that break you slowly later. He'd say things like, "You don't have to be the strong one all the time," or "Let me handle it." I thought that was love, someone taking over so I could finally breathe. We bought the house 2 years later. Well, I bought it technically, but he convinced me to put his name on the deed so we could build equity together. My dad's life insurance had helped with the down payment. Ethan said it made sense. I wanted to believe him. For a while, everything looked fine. He worked remote as a consultant, always on calls. I handled the day-to-day stuff, groceries, bills, keeping my dad's memory alive through little things. His vinyl records, the way I'd oil the baseball gloves he left behind, the watch I never wore because it still smelled faintly like him. But then Ethan started changing. He'd come home late, edgy, snapping over little things. When I asked what was wrong, he'd say I was too sensitive. I'd find small gaps in his stories, receipts from restaurants I'd never heard of, texts he'd delete so fast I barely caught the previews. The first real sign came when I noticed my dad's pocket knife missing from the display shelf. Ethan brushed it off, said he moved it for cleaning. I didn't press, I should have. Then there was Clara, my cousin. We grew up close, summers together, same high school. She always had this competitive streak that made everything feel like a contest. She'd once told me, half joking, that she envied how my dad favored me because I was more responsible. When she met Ethan at a family barbecue, she got that glint in her eye, the one that said I want this too. But I trusted her. I trusted both of them. Over time, Ethan started spending more time helping Clara with her business. She had a small event planning startup and always needed marketing advice. I thought nothing of it. My therapist back then even said I should be glad he's socializing. Then the house started to feel different. Ethan would close doors when he took calls. He moved my dad's photo off the living room wall because he said it made guests uncomfortable. I remember the night he told me, casually over dinner, "You should let go of the past. It's time to move forward." I didn't realize forward meant without me. He began consolidating our finances for convenience. I had no reason to suspect what he was actually doing, changing account access, redirecting mail, using my father's inheritance as leverage. And Clara, she'd stopped calling as often. When she did, her voice was guarded, distant. I told myself it was stress, work, grief, anything but betrayal. But now, standing inside that storage unit, surrounded by boxes marked with both my father's handwriting and Ethan's labels, I knew none of it had been random. And what I found in the corner of that unit proved it. There was a safe, my dad's old gun safe, one Ethan claimed had been accidentally donated. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with folders, documents, photos, bank slips, and something with my cousin's name written across it. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that safe before I forced myself to open it. It smelled faintly of dust and motor oil, the way my dad's garage used to. Inside were folders stacked so neatly, it looked like someone had been cataloging my life. The first file was labeled mortgage/transfer. Inside were notarized copies of the deed transfer, every line forged with my signature. Except it wasn't my handwriting. The date, 3 months before Ethan ever mentioned Clara needing help with her credit. The next folder was worse, COLLECTIBLES/inventory. It listed every one of my dad's items he'd supposedly sold. But next to each entry was a different name. C. Simmons, Clara, he'd been selling them to her for $1 each. The sales were legally valid. I remember my hands trembling as I flipped through them. Every page screamed how deep their scheme went. This wasn't some impulsive affair. It was methodical. A two-person con built on my grief. I pulled out my phone, shaking, and started taking photos of everything. My heart was hammering so loud, I barely heard the unit door creak. "Hey," the manager's voice made me jump. "You can't be in here long without authorization. You're not on the account." I stuffed what I could into my bag, a few documents, some photos, a flash drive labeled Archive 2, and got out before anyone could stop me. Back home, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. It was mostly PDFs, transaction logs, bank transfers, even private emails between Ethan and Clara. The messages made my skin crawl. E. Once the title's in your name, she'll have no leverage. She'll just pay what's owed and walk away. C. I don't feel bad. She's had it easy all her life. E. She's sentimental, that's her flaw. There was a folder of photos, too. Screenshots of my texts to Ethan, notes he'd taken about my emotional patterns, even screenshots of my therapy summaries, the ones I'd written for myself in the Notes app. He'd copied them, used them to study me. At that point, the grief turned into something else, something cold and clear. I called Clara. She didn't pick up, of course. So I texted her one line, "Meet me, tomorrow, 6 p.m., the old house, you owe me that much." She read it within seconds, never replied. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt like proof of how stupid I'd been, every memory, every little kindness Ethan ever gave me, now tainted. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had, trying to figure out when he stopped loving me. But maybe he never did. The next day, she came, wearing sunglasses and that fake confidence she always had. She didn't even step inside. Just leaned against her car like she was in control. I don't know what you think you found, she said, but Ethan handled everything legally. You forged my name, I said. You think that's legal, she smirked. You're too emotional to handle property. Everyone knows that. That's when I realized she wasn't scared, she was rehearsed. She thought she'd already won. I waited until she left before I went through the rest of the flash drive. That's when I found a file titled Plan B. Inside was a list. Names, dates, property addresses, and beside each name a short description. Some of them were women he'd dated before me. Others were people I didn't recognize. But what chilled me most was the column labeled Post-Liquidation Contact Status. Every entry said the same thing, cut off. And that's when I realized Ethan had done this before. I sat there staring at that list, the names blurring until they stopped looking real. It hit me in waves. Ethan wasn't just a manipulative ex. He was a serial operator. Every woman on that list had something valuable. A business, an inheritance, property, or some kind of trust fund. He picked women with loss, the kind who clung to emotional anchors like family mementos and partnership. And I was just his next project. One name stood out: Madeline Brooks. She lived in Knoxville. There was a note next to her name, filed 2020, settled quietly. I Googled her. Took a while, but I found a local news mention, local artist accused of mortgage fraud, charges dropped. My stomach twisted. The house address matched the one in his list. He had destroyed her too, so I did something reckless. I found her on Facebook and sent a message. Did you know Ethan R.? She replied within 5 minutes. Why? Because he did something to me, and your name was on his files. She went quiet, then wrote, meet me, tomorrow, don't bring him, don't tell him you talked to me. That night I barely slept. My heart wouldn't stop racing. When I met her the next morning at a diner just off I-40, she looked older than her profile picture, tired in the way only betrayal ages you. She told me everything. Ethan had promised to help her refinance her mother's house after her mom's stroke. He forged documents, transferred partial ownership to a shell company, liquidated assets, and framed her for the fraud when it started unraveling. She spent a year clearing her name. He disappeared before the cops could track him. He's a chameleon, she said. He studies how you grieve, how you trust, then he uses that to drain you. Her words made my skin crawl. I showed her the files from the flash drive. Her eyes widened. That's his playbook. He kept records so he could reuse tactics. Then she pointed to something in one of the email headers. A sender's domain, Stratus Legal Trust. It wasn't random. That was Ethan's alias. She said he used that name to set up LLCs and transfer ownerships, all legal on paper. But here's the kicker. The domain registration used Clara's email. He wasn't just conning me with her, they were in it together. Every piece of paper, every fake sale, every forged signature, she'd helped file it. She wasn't some victim who fell in love with the wrong guy. She was his partner. Madeline leaned back, shaking her head. You need to be careful. Once he's done, he tries to bury the evidence and anyone who might talk. I didn't want to believe her, but something about the fear in her voice made me realize it was more than metaphorical. On my way home, I noticed a car following me, dark gray sedan, tinted windows. It stayed behind me all the way until I pulled into my driveway. When I stopped, it rolled past slowly, the driver's face hidden behind sunglasses. That night, I heard footsteps outside my house. Just a few, soft, like someone testing the deck boards. When I flipped the porch light on, nothing was there except a small envelope tucked under the door mat. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, me at the storage unit earlier that week. Someone had been watching, and on the back, written in Ethan's handwriting, were 5 words, "You don't know the half." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch with my dad's old watch on my wrist. Yes, I'd taken it back from the storage unit, and stared at that Polaroid until the sun came up. I realized something then. Ethan wanted me to panic. He'd always been about control. Fear was just his favorite leash. But this time, I wasn't the same person who handed him my father's memory wrapped in velvet and trust. This time, I had proof. I started organizing. Every document, every file, every text. I printed copies and hid them in 3 places: the house, my car, and a safe deposit box I opened under my maiden name. Then I reached out to a lawyer, a quiet, gray-haired man named Rick who handled estate fraud cases. He listened, flipping through my evidence like he'd seen worse but still looked angry. "You have enough here to blow their world apart," he said. Forgery, title fraud, misrepresentation. The deed transfer alone is a felony if you didn't consent. But when I mentioned Ethan's LLC and Clara's involvement, he frowned. You'll need to hit them smart, not loud. People like that are slippery. We build the case, then we make them think they're safe until we pull it. I nodded. I want to be the one who pulls it. Over the next week, I started laying the groundwork. I texted Clara, pretending to give in, told her I was ready to talk settlement and close the chapter. She took the bait immediately. She said she and Ethan had nothing to hide and were ready to make peace. We set a meeting at a coffee shop downtown. What she didn't know was that Rick would be sitting 2 tables away with a small recording device. I walked in with shaking hands but forced a smile. Clara looked smug. She was wearing my dad's ring on a chain. I almost lost it right there. So, she said, sipping her latte, you've had time to process. Maybe now you see we just handled things more responsibly than you could. Yeah, I said evenly. You always were better at handling things that didn't belong to you. She laughed, thinking she'd won. Look, it's not personal. Ethan said you'd make this emotional. You always do. The moment she said his name, Rick's recording light blinked. I leaned forward. So you admit it, Ethan told you about the deed transfer? She paused, then smirked. Of course he did. We did everything together. Got it. She didn't even notice the small click of Rick's pen. After the meeting, I sent Ethan a text too. I know what you're hiding. Meet me at the house. Tomorrow night. No cops, just closure. He replied instantly. Closure works for me. That night, I drove to the storage unit again. I had a plan now. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make them live in the fear they'd fed me. I gathered the rest of the evidence, photos, forged documents, all of it, and arranged them in a neat little folder labeled Final Lesson. The next evening, when Ethan walked through the front door, I was ready. He looked exactly the same, calm, smug, confident, like nothing could touch him. Still in my dad's house, I said quietly. He smiled. Our house, for now. I slid the folder across the table. You might want to sit down. It's your turn to learn something. His eyes narrowed when he opened it. Then his face drained of color. Because the first page wasn't the deed transfer. It was something else entirely, something I hadn't even realized until Rick pointed it out. One of his forged documents wasn't forged. The notary stamp, the signature, the witness, all real. And the witness's name was someone I never expected to see. Clara's husband. When I saw that name, I almost thought it was a coincidence. But it wasn't. The witness signature on that document, the one that supposedly verified my consent to the property transfer, was Clara's husband, Dylan. He'd signed it months before she even left him for Ethan. Ethan saw the moment I recognized the name. His face twitched, a small, involuntary movement that told me everything. You didn't think I'd notice that, did you? I said, my voice steady. He leaned back, calculating. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Dylan notarized the transfer, which means either he didn't know what he was signing or he did. And if he did, that means your little game involved 3 people, not 2. For a second, Ethan stayed quiet. Then he smiled. That same slow, poisonous smirk I used to mistake for confidence. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. Shame it's too late. He stood up, adjusted his cuffs like this was just another business deal, and said, Dylan was easy. He hated Clara long before I came along. He wanted her gone, so I gave him a way out. He notarized a few things, got a nice payout, and disappeared. So he helped you ruin her too, I said. Oh, I ruined everyone in that family. You're all the same, entitled, sentimental, desperate for validation. My stomach turned. He wasn't just cruel, he enjoyed it. After he left, I called Dylan. He didn't pick up the first 3 times, but on the 4th try, he answered, voice low, wary. Who is this? It's me, I said. You signed a property transfer for Ethan and Clara. I have the document. There was a pause, then a sigh. I figured this would come back around. He admitted everything. Ethan had approached him first, told him Clara was cheating on him and that he could help Dylan cut her off financially if he notarized some business paperwork. Dylan didn't ask questions. He was bitter and wanted revenge. He signed the papers, got a wire transfer, and left town. He didn't know the paperwork wasn't about Clara's assets, it was mine. Jesus Christ, he whispered when I told him. He played me too. That's when something shifted. Dylan offered to help me, not out of guilt, but out of hatred for Ethan. He said he still had a backup of emails from when Ethan first reached out, proof of the whole setup. "If I send you what I have," he said, "you'll make sure he burns." "Every last piece of him," I promised. That night, Dylan forwarded everything, emails, messages, even bank transfers showing Ethan paying him under the same fake LLC. Rick said it was gold, enough to tie Ethan and Clara to forgery, conspiracy, and wire fraud. But there was one more thing. In one of Dylan's email chains, Ethan mentioned something cryptic. "All originals stored in Unit B. If she pushes, we bury her with the backup." Unit B wasn't the same storage unit I'd been to. That meant there was another one. A second stash, probably containing the rest of Ethan's crimes. Rick told me not to go alone, but I did anyway. It was just past midnight when I found it, a different facility, newer, cleaner, almost empty. The manager hesitated when I gave Ethan's fake company name, but after a little persuasion and a $100 bill, he led me to a locked metal door at the back. The second I opened it, the smell hit me: damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Inside were rows of plastic bins labeled with women's names, each one neatly sealed. Madeline, Brooke, Teresa, my own name. Each bin was filled with personal items, photos, handwritten letters, copies of IDs, trophies, almost. Like he'd kept pieces of everyone he'd destroyed. But mine was different. Inside my bin wasn't just my paperwork or photos. There was a flash drive, one I'd never seen before. When I plugged it in later that night, there was only one file. A short video clip, 30 seconds long. It was Ethan, sitting in my father's chair, looking directly into the camera. "You still think you're in control, don't you?" he said. "But remember, every time you think you're ahead, it's because I let you be." Then he smiled, slow and cold. "And I'm not done." I showed that video to Rick the next morning. He leaned forward, jaw tight. "That's not a threat, it's a message. He wants you to know this isn't about money." And Rick was right. Because the more we dug, the more it became clear. Ethan didn't just take from people. He engineered emotional collapses like he was designing them. He left patterns, deliberate, psychological fingerprints in every life he touched. I started rewatching that video, pausing on every frame, every flicker of expression. He wasn't angry, he was calm, detached, like someone giving a lecture. Then it hit me, the way he said, "Let you be ahead." It sounded rehearsed, like something he'd said before. So I went back through his old messages, the ones from when we first started dating. There it was, an almost identical phrase in a text he'd sent me years ago when I'd beaten him at a board game. "I let you win. Always good to make you think you're ahead." I scrolled through more. Again and again, he used the same tone, always patronizing, always about control. It wasn't random, it was his thing. But it wasn't until Rick managed to trace Ethan's LLCs that the real reason surfaced. Behind Stratus Legal Trust, behind the fake companies and business accounts, was a man named Henry Carson. That was Ethan's real name. And buried in a court database from 2014 was a lawsuit, Carson v. Simmons Family Estate. My family, more specifically, my father. Ethan, or Henry, had sued my dad's construction business years ago after a contract dispute. My father had fired him for falsifying invoices, then testified against him when the company pressed charges. The case was dismissed, but the record was public. Ethan had held that grudge for 9 years. He'd found me on purpose. Every kind gesture, every conversation about grief and healing, every late-night comfort session after my dad died, it was all strategy. Rick put it together in a whisper. "He didn't pick you because you were vulnerable. He picked you because you were his revenge." I felt the room tilt. I could barely breathe. Ethan hadn't loved me, or Clara, or anyone else. He'd built an entire life around punishing my father's memory through me. Taking his heirlooms, his home, his daughter, that was the point. Every stolen collectible, every forged paper, every whispered lie was part of a personal vendetta. And Clara, she was just convenient, bitter toward me, eager for attention. The perfect accomplice. He fed her the same poison my father once caught him spreading: flattery, validation, promises of a shared legacy. He'd told her that together they could rewrite history, that my father owed him. She believed him. When I confronted her with the lawsuit, she didn't even deny it. She just said, "He told me your dad ruined him. I didn't think he meant this." No remorse, just self-pity. That's when I stopped shaking. The grief burned away and left something cleaner, colder. I looked at her and said, "My dad didn't ruin him. He saved people from him, And now I'm going to finish what he started. For the first time, Clara looked scared, because she knew I wasn't bluffing. The next morning, I started the final phase. No screaming matches, no public breakdowns, just precision. I met Rick at his office, handed him every file, photo, and recording I'd collected. He smiled for the first time since we met. It's enough. Once we file, they'll both be under investigation within days. Fraud, forgery, collusion, false notarization, it's all here. Good, I said. But that's not enough. Because Ethan didn't just steal things, he rewrote my life. So I decided to rewrite his. That night, I created an anonymous email using the same alias Ethan once used, Stratus Legal Trust. From that account, I sent every shred of evidence to the other women on his list. Madeline, Brooke, Teresa. I attached a note that read, "He did it to all of us. Time to return the favor." Within 48 hours, they'd all replied. One sent me screenshots of new LLCs Ethan had recently registered under fresh fake names. Another found bank accounts linked to his shell companies. Together, we built a web no one man could escape. When Rick filed the civil suit, I leaked the evidence anonymously to a local reporter who covered financial crimes. I made sure they included his real name. 2 days later, the story hit the news. Con artist targeted grieving women for property and inheritance fraud investigation expands. His face was on every local outlet, his aliases, his companies, his photo standing next to Clara at a rooftop restaurant, both smiling like they'd already won. Except this time, the caption under the image didn't say love goals. It said fugitives under investigation. The fallout was fast. The state froze his accounts, suspended his business licenses, and issued a warrant for further questioning. Clara's family turned on her instantly. Her husband, Dylan, gave a full statement to the DA in exchange for immunity. Within a week, everything Ethan had taken from me, my house, my father's heirlooms, my dignity, was back in motion to be legally restored. It would take months, maybe years, but I'd get it all back. Still, I wanted one last thing. I went back to the storage unit one final time. Everything was still there, the bins, the folders, the ghosts of all the lives he'd broken. I took my father's belongings and burned the rest. Every letter, every photo, every reminder of Ethan's existence went up in smoke. The flames reflected in the metal of my dad's watch. I whispered, "It's done." A week later, I got one final message. A text from an unknown number. "You think you won, you just took your turn." I didn't reply. I just blocked the number and turned off my phone. Because here's the thing about people like him, they survive on reaction. Silence is the only wound they can't heal from. Now the house is quiet again. The taxes are fixed, the deeds clean, and the living room wall has my father's photo back where it belongs. Sometimes I catch myself looking at the watch, remembering the night I first saw that rooftop selfie and felt my world collapse. But now, when the sunlight hits it just right, it feels different, not like a reminder of loss but of survival. Ethan wanted to teach me a lesson about trust. He did, just not the one he intended.